Welcome to Pushing Beyond the Obvious, and I am your host Mukesh Gupta, author of the world's first business poem, Your Startup Mentor. This is a show where I bring you ideas and insights from some of the best minds in the world so that you can be a better entrepreneur and grow your business. Today's episode of Pushing Beyond the Obvious is brought to you by Skillshare, an online learning platform with over 18,000 plus classes on business, marketing, technology, and many more. Get 2 months of Skillshare for free at rmukeshgupta.com/learn. Hi Annie, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you? It's so nice
Um,
to chat with you today.
Same here. Thanks for taking time and talking to me today. So, for the benefit of my audience, I think Dory Clark, who we had on the show earlier, suggested that we should definitely talk to you as well because she felt that my audience will learn a lot from you. So, thanks a lot for taking time and talking to us today.
Oh, no, absolutely. And Dory is such a fabulous wealth of just practical, not just, but very practical, great insights. So she's a fantastic person to listen to on your podcast
Yeah. So
for your audience. Well, everybody has to listen to that in the audience,
so
most
for the
definitely.
Yeah, so for the benefit of my audience, if I can ask you to introduce yourself and the body of work that you have done, so that people can put everything else you say in context.
Absolutely. So I am an executive coach and I also do a lot of speaking as well. So I work with large clients like TripAdvisor, Sanofi Genzyme, and large advertising agencies. I'm also an executive coach at the Harvard Business School, Executive Education. And I have also contributed to Harvard Business Review. And so I think what people would say is, well, you have an audience of entrepreneurs. And people would say, well, how does the work that you do with these large corporations translate to me? And that's what I want to talk about with you today, because I think no matter what we do, there's just some guiding principles and tenets that we can say that work for everybody. So we can talk about that too. Okay?
So let's start with that. So if you have seen
Absolutely.
guiding tenets, so maybe if I can ask you to share some of those guiding tenets that you've seen that are relevant, whether you are a large corporate or a mid-sized entrepreneur.
Right. So, some of them are, I would say, actually kind of practical and maybe not very sexy to talk about, but they matter for everybody. So, I think one of the first ones I would say is persistence, right? We all, and it matters for me as well because I'm an entrepreneur as well because I have my executive coaching practice. It's persistence. And how do you deal with failure, right? That many of the people that very successful executives that I work with work extremely hard and they persist even through failure. And a lot of them have had a lot of bumps in the road. And how do you just kind of really push past it and and be dogged in your goals, right? I think another tenet that I see, or a pillar, is reading. Okay. I think that there is a point where many people that I coach, um, or I look at a lot of executives out there, they stop kind of the learning, right? How do you it doesn't take a lot of time each week, but just have something interesting to read, right? And one thing I tell everybody to do from a practicality perspective, because I'm all about the practical, is read Harvard Business Review. Either go to the site, go to get the magazine, because that's what CEOs are reading and talking about. And it doesn't matter what size the company is, it's still great reading. Okay. I think too, um, I said hard work, reading. I think too, many people say to me that when we talk about their leadership journeys, there is just a serendipity. Think about serendipity in terms of your opportunities, right? The opportunity that comes in front of you may be very different than what you would thought it was going to be. So being open to all those opportunities for your businesses. So I think those are a couple of ones that I look at consistently when I see from successful leaders.
So let's unpack a little bit of what you've already said. Let's start
Sure.
with failure. So
Hmm.
every entrepreneur, I think, is familiar with failure in a very intimate manner, right? Because being an
Yes.
entrepreneur means that you've tried something, it may work, may not work. You deal with whatever you get, and then you continue to move on. So
Yes.
in dealing with failure, so there are multiple ways that someone can deal with failure. So is there a way that you've seen, or is there a process of dealing with failure which actually moves
Hmm.
people forward rather than holds people back? Because I've seen a lot of people deal with failure, struggle a lot. I mean, it slows them down. And there are some
Right.
people who fail and then immediately learn from that failure and bounce back much higher. So
Right.
is there a
Right.
process between, or what is it that the guys who who struggle with failure and slow down versus people who actually, feed off of that failure and jump higher? What is the difference between them? How do they approach failure?
Well, I can say this for myself and a lot of other people I've coached, and it doesn't matter what kind of failure it is, right? It feels really personal, and everybody says it's business, don't take it personally. But I'm not sure I really feel. When it really gets down to that level, yeah, of course it feels personal, right? In some instance, right? So one thing I'm going back to the simple, right? I think what I have seen for other successful leaders is action. Okay, no matter what it is, you have to process, think about where I can make changes to move forward and kind of use it as a debrief. Well, what could I have done differently? In that client meeting, in that sales meeting, did I really connect with the client and tell the stories and think about outcome? Diagnosing what it is, but it really is truly just about action. It any small little action the next day you can do, because actions feed on each other, and that's where I see the difference with success. You have to take action, get back up, dust yourself off, and get going. So that's really what I would say simply.
Yeah, very interesting. So now let's move to the concept of serendipity and opportunity that you're talking about. So as
Hmm.
an entrepreneur, I would assume that I am open to opportunity, and that is the reason why I'm actually being an entrepreneur itself. But in the process of being an entrepreneur, a lot of times I have seen people who lose track of everything else and are just so intensely focused on that one thing that they are trying to do,
Mm.
irrespective of whether they are seeing success or failure. I mean, it's good that we talk about persistence and grit,
Yep.
but on the other hand, if you persist and show grit on things which are not working without understanding why they are not working, can also
Yep.
create a lot of issue, because then you're not progressing. And at the same time, by such intense focus, you kind of get oblivious to all the opportunity around you. So
Yes.
how do you balance this? I mean, you've seen someone balancing this really well, and if so, how do they do it?
Okay. So, I think too, it's great to have a singular focus. You're absolutely right. Have persistence and grit. But how do you pick your head up off the desk and see everything else that's around you? So, a couple of things I'd like to say is, and I talk about this a lot, whether you're in a large corporation, you have your own business, is networking. It's really about knowledge and also seeing what else is out there. Because if you're just myopically focused on this plan, this opportunity, you don't see everything else. And there's always, when I talk about networking, I just mean talking to somebody who's interesting, because even you never know, right? And that part of what we're talking about with serendipity is luck, and it's just the luck of meeting and running kind of in traffic, right? Just meeting lots of different people. that are out there, and that matters, and I think too, um, is, and Steve Jobs used to do this, and a lot, and I've seen other CEOs of large software companies do this. They take walks, they take walking meetings, because that physical piece, you hear about people getting their best ideas in the showers. That's because they're doing something different that allows their mind to kind of process everything that's going on. Talk with your team, or take that kind of physicality piece to it. So I'll tell you, I didn't believe it. Okay, so one day I thought, okay, I was putting together speech and I needed something, I needed a creative activity to talk about. So I thought, oh, what the heck? I'm going to try, right? And it really did work. I took this walk, and all of a sudden, a great creative idea for this speech, it just popped into my head. So I think it's kind of getting out of the routine. It is what we're talking about that helps with serendipity. And
Uh,
yes, we need regimented, you can't be surfing Facebook all day long, obviously, but 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 there is a point, where I think the regimented piece, um, comes into play, where it doesn't work, at least for me, right? So one story, I worked in advertising agencies before I became an executive coach. So I really learned about what was what is brainstorming? How do you kind of get out of that routine? And it's kind of stopping and just doing something different.
Interesting.
So,
So the other thing that is interesting that you said was around the ability to focus heads down work, and the ability to heads up and look at everything around
hmm
you. And what I have realized, again, this is my personal experience and people whom I have learned from, is that every week or every 15 days, you need to schedule time in your calendar for allowing serendipity to hit you. So this is something that one of my coach told me, is that every 15 days do something which you would never otherwise do. So for example,
yes.
go to an area which you would never go to. If you never walk, go walking. If you never swim, go swimming. If you never go to a networking event, go to a networking event. If you go to a networking
Completely.
event, go to an event where you absolutely don't have a clue about anyone else in the event, and is completely new. Go outside of the
hmm
industry. Read
hmm
something that you would not read, but put it in your calendar that every 15 days, for a couple of hours or for half a day, you will do something which is not something that you would do otherwise normally. And that just one habit of putting that in the calendar and actually following through, I think has helped me so much in identifying so many different things that I could do. So, for example, this entire podcast actually came out of one of those ideas.
Ah,
Yeah, so I was, having a conversation with someone, and someone told me, there is this new thing called podcasting, which is seems to be taking off. This is in 2014, and I was
hmm
like, okay, let me just try it out. And I said, okay, in this 2 hours that I had set up for allowing serendipity to hit me, I said, okay, today I'm going to listen to 3 podcasts episodes. So I picked out three. One was, I distinctly remember one of the episode was around how do you start a podcast. One
mm,
episode was around entrepreneurs talking about what they are doing and how they are doing, what kind of challenges that they're facing and stuff like that. And the last one was an interview between two people having a conversation about advertising. And
ah, yep.
I thought that the medium was interesting, and I said, okay, let me reach out to 5 people, even if 2 people agree that they will be willing to spend time with me and talk to me about whatever it is that they're doing.
hmm
I will figure out a way to launch the show. And out of 5, 3 immediately said yes. One said yes later, and the last one said yes 1.5, 2 years later. And yeah, here we are. I mean, it's probably around second season. First season we had 56 episodes. Second season now,
Fantastic.
I think we are at about 10th or 12th episode that we are recording right now. So again, all of this coming out of that structured time for serendipity to hit you?
That's brilliant. And I think that's brilliant. And I think something else that's really interesting is that why not just ask, right? And that's another point about like serendipity, right? Why not just ask? And people say yes. Of course they want to have a conversation. So, I think that's another really important point to think about with serendipity. What's the worst thing? And there are times I don't feel like asking either. Believe me, we all kind of feel that way. But if you get, like you said, in the habit of scheduling every 15 days, if it's just reaching out to somebody, right? So something different. So here's a kind of thought for everybody about something different. I used to write poetry in college.
Oh.
I haven't done much creative since. And I was kind of feeling this, I need to do something creative. So I've started taking poetry writing classes again. While it has nothing to do with my business or my clients, it's just very interesting, and it gets my kind of creative thinking moving forward, that I can be creative with my clients and how I have conversations with people. So that's just one other little tactical example when we think about that.
So let's just move to the past experience that you spoke about. You said you come from an advertising background, right? So what kind of work did you do for advertising?
So I'm dating myself here. I worked in advertising in the 80s. So I worked on during the launch of the Apple computer, American Express corporate card. I ran large media departments in advertising agencies like Y&R, in Digitas, and I also worked at Arnold as well, Arnold Worldwide in Boston. So, and people kind of say to me, well, so how does that translate to business, right? What are those things? Because it kind of gives people pause, right? And I think the couple of things I would say is I really learned how to sell, right, in new business pitches, and how to flex to the potential client. When I mean flex my communication style, if somebody is very data oriented, I'm not going to get up with just one pretty picture and show that to them. I need to focus the process for them. While I am not a data oriented person, I've learned to flex that way, right? And I think too that gets into client service or customer service. How do you make your clients, and how, when you go out and sell, that you have their back, you know what it is that they need to do, right? And there's that little bit of likability factor too, right? That I'm in this with you. And so I think those are some of the tenets that I think translate to everybody from how you sell or what your businesses are from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Interesting. If I may ask, were you part of the Apple campaign, Apple computer launch campaign as well? So you did mention.
So I worked on the direct marketing piece of that. And one thing that I worked on was an infomercial for, at that time, we put computers in a town in Oregon. And that was one of the first infomercials that was ever done for a large Fortune company. So yes, that's what I worked on. I did not work on the big branding launch of 1984, but the components of it after that. Yep.
But is there something that you remember from that campaign which had an impact? Because I've seen some of those advertising from that time that Apple had, and I'm just wondering, if in the process of doing that advertisement, either in terms of how Apple used to work with you guys, or anything else that comes to mind, which could be pertinent to entrepreneurs to know about.
So you know what I think I would say, and it doesn't translate, it translates to every client I work with, not just Apple or American Express or any of them. It's how do you work together as a team with your clients? When you have built trust and you can take the risks together, that's where the most creative, impactful campaigns, or what, or for us, for me, campaigns. When when we built that mutual trust, we were able to really take risks, right? And there's always going to be bumps around along the way, always going to be, mistakes, issues, but how do you, and it's different for every team, right? Every team is different, or every client that you have, how do you build that mutual trust so that you could ultimately, as I said before, get that really creative spark? Because that's the difference, I
Interesting.
think.
Interesting. And when you said, when we were talking about your advertising stint and what you learned from there, you mentioned the
Mm-hmm.
fact that, the ability to flex yourself or your communication to match the style of someone
Mm-hmm.
to whom you're presenting to is such a critical skill in sales. Now, the question that comes is, if you know the style or if you know the preference of the
Mm-hmm.
person you are presenting to, it is quite possible that you are able to tailor your presentation accordingly.
Yes.
What happens if you're meeting someone for the first time, and
Mm-hmm.
is there a way for you to judge whether someone is leaning towards data or visual or auditory or
Mm.
a mix, and adjust as you go along in your first pitch as well? So is that something that you've seen someone do or you've done? If so, how can one learn about it?
Okay, so let me tell you two pillars for everybody, and then I'm going to tell you a story about it. So I think the simplest one is listening. Because really listening in the preliminary meeting, how can you get a preliminary meeting, or even in that meeting, really listening? Because if you think about it, we all can do better listening, because as as sometimes we're in selling and we get in that mode, we're thinking about the answer first and not listening to the person and what they really want. So how do you it's really just about slowing down. And I think two that I coach people on is simply body language. Body language never lies. So how do you watch what's happening in the meeting? So for this is interesting. I coached a senior director in R&D, and he was having issues about presenting his programs managing up. So we really sat and talked about it. And what happened, what we really came to see, the net was he was bringing in a 50-page dense presentation to senior leadership. And really, if he thought about it, he was done after the first 3 pages and he was getting the yes, but he wanted to continue to present the other 45 pages. If you've already gotten the yes at page 3, stop. Even though those 47 other pages are fantastic, how do you flex from that perspective?
Very
So
interesting.
that's just you know, it's just the little nuances in watching and
Very
listening.
interesting. Very interesting. So let's move to the other aspect of what you do now, which is executive
Mm-hmm.
coaching.
Yes.
Um, so one of the things that I have realized, and I'm seeing more and more entrepreneurs realize, is the importance of having a coach. Even for example, what Dory talks about, having a board of mentors
Yes.
rather than having one mentor. So now the question that comes is, what is the difference between having a coach versus having a mentor? Is there a difference?
Mm.
And if yes, what is the difference? And when should someone go for a mentor, and when should someone go for a coach?
I think there's no right or wrong answer in terms of which one. What I really believe is, how do we get different perspectives? That's what we're really looking for. So a mentor is somebody who's been there and has experienced many of the issues and opportunities that you have. And they are going to direct you to go talk to this person. You need to change your business plan in this manner. A coach is a bit different because we don't start with the right answer. We work through it together, through a series of, whether it's starting off with some assessments, it's asking the right question. And some people think it's kind of the Socrates method, right? But that's not it either. It's kind of the combination of consulting and coaching is the way that I like to look at it. So it's really it's me asking you the question, right? So let me give you for an example to everybody. So tell me what went well in your last new business pitch. And you might say, um, I like my presentation was all pictures, no words. Okay. So how might that work for the next new business pitch you have next week? So it's asking those types of questions versus a mentor would say, I work, I only like to use data in my presentations. You should use data. And I'm being um, very black and white about this, but there's nuances to all of it, right? Because some mentors are more coaching, some coaches are more consultative. So that's really how the differences lay out.
Interesting. And so there is also this adage that when the student is ready, the teacher arrives. So
Mm-hmm.
how does an entrepreneur get ready for being coached? Is there something that they should do, or is there a specific mindset that they should be in order to make the most out of the time that they spend with a coach?
Mm-hmm. So I think there are two things, and I think you hit on it first. Exactly. It's mindset. When I first meet somebody that I'm potentially going to coach, I want to know, and I ask questions, whether you're motivated and willing to learn. And that's really the simple aspect of that. On the back end, where I see people succeed the most with coaching, it's that I take what I need to work on, kind of quote unquote, the homework, and I really take charge of that and I do it. And I'm really willing to listen to different points of view. I had this CTO that I was working with, and he really didn't believe in coaching in the beginning. And we did his 360 and we worked on it. And the thing that he said to me about coaching is that you held up the shining mirror to me so that I could really see the areas that I needed to focus on because we all have blind spots and we all can't see them. So how do you find somebody, whether it's one of your partners, somebody externally, a mentor, a coach, to find that shiny mirror to help you see the opportunities as well as the blind spots?
Interesting. And how does one go about finding an executive coach? Because I know for a matter of fact that not every coach is a right coach for every entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure that there is a fitment that needs to be done either in terms of the experience that the coach brings in, or
Right.
the skill sets that the entrepreneur brings in, or whatever. So how does an entrepreneur, or for that matter a coach, decide whether this coaching assignment is a right fit, or whether they should look at someone else?
Uh, I think that really gets down to what I was talking about earlier in advertising. There's a part of it that's chemistry and likability, right? That does this coach, are we going to have, or me on the other side as well, right? Are we going to have that kind of chemistry and mix that we can push and move forward together? It's kind of that quality that you can't really explain. It doesn't have to be perfect, obviously, but how do you kind of find that rhythm with somebody in terms of working with them? So I know that's not the perfect practical answer, but it really is that piece. And it might be that you need to interview a couple of different coaches to find or step back and think for a second, what is it that I need from somebody, and articulate it to them, because we're all not mind readers. So what is it that you need that will help you be most successful?
So let's unpack that a little bit. So
Yeah.
assuming that I'm an entrepreneur and I want to interview, let's say, three coaches whom I would like to
Mm-hmm.
work with, and I know exactly, maybe broadly, that these are one or two areas that I would like to work upon.
Yep.
Now, how do I interview an executive coach? I mean, what kind of questions should I have prepared, or what kind of things that I should be looking for, which are obvious, either signs which are pointing towards great fitment, or signs that are pointing to the fact that you should run from there as fast as you can?
So, oh, that's great. Well, I would hope you wouldn't have to run fast. That's awesome. uh, so I think, first of all, I'm going to put it back on me, right? So what do I do that makes people feel comfortable? That is what you're looking for. Comfort in that they know what they're doing, right? So when I come in, think about first two. I'm going to ask you questions about you. I want to be the one to hear about, as a coach, I want to be asking you, here are all the questions. So we can really start to almost, even if there's 30 minutes, start to articulate, hey, this is one goal that you and I could be working on. I think, too, even though, as I said before, I am not a process oriented person, you do need to have a process. The process of having a goal and then working on the specifics and measuring those results. While coaching, you can't really definitively always measure quantifiably the data, but making sure that you have that process with the coach. Because I think the goal piece is the most important piece. So that's what you want to be looking for first. And I think, too, this is just something that's important to me, is that a coach is always helping you to learn. When I work with people, maybe they don't want the reading or their assessments, but you want to make sure that you're working with somebody that is also helping you to learn as well.
Interesting. So let's dive down a little bit about your specific coaching practice as well. So I know that you have a specific process of coaching clients. You start with a goal and you have a process. If you can just explain what your process of coaching your client looks like. Let's just play a game. Let's assume that I'm one
Oh,
of your
sure.
clients, and I know that for example, I want to let's say one of the skills that I want to work upon is my ability to uh, uh, engage large audience when I'm speaking to them. So that's my
Mm-hmm.
goal. And how would go ahead and what would your process look like if you were to coach someone like me?
Okay. So I would first say to you, okay, what is in your, you want to start speaking to large audiences. What is it that you want to do specifically in speaking to a large audience? What's one action that's important to you?
So I think I want to spread the ideas that I have and want people to take action on those ideas.
Okay. So then I would say to you, let's talk about what are those ideas. Tell me one idea that you want to spread out there.
Let's say that the healthcare system right now, as
Okay.
it is in the country, or rather in the world, is broken. And
Mm-hmm.
someone needs to fix it. And the way someone needs to fix it is to focus on the patient rather than the doctors and the machines and the hospitals that currently they are focusing on. So
Okay.
that's the message
So
that I want to spread.
that's the message that you want to say. So let's also pretend that I know that you've been doing podcasting and all of that. So I would say to you, based on all of your success that you've been doing in your podcast, what are three things that you do well in your podcast that you can use to take to the broader world with your ideas such as healthcare? What do you do well in your podcasting?
I think I'm good in terms of being present when I'm doing these conversations,
Yes.
and I'm not very rigid in terms of a set of questions or the kind of answers that I expect when I'm talking to someone. I allow conversation to drift in a way, natural drift,
Mm-hmm.
and try to get it to the conclusion that is the natural conclusion and not necessarily the conclusion that I want
Wow.
it to be. So that is
Yes.
what I think my audience has told me that they like about when they hear episodes on my show.
So what I would say to you is that's a special strength. So that you really listen to the audience. You're very conversational. I just want to make sure that I'm confirming this, right? You're very conversational. You'll take the conversation where it needs to go. So when you're going to the broader audience, how can you leverage those specific things, right? Maybe, you know, one idea, I'm going to give you an idea, right? This is my consulting piece, right? So that if you're sitting on a panel, how do you look back and say, here are the things that I do well? I can remember this podcast that I did with X person. I'm going to use those stories or those ideas to take the broader message out. So that's kind of how I would be coaching you. And I was actually just coaching you.
So thank you. So
Sure.
so so how does that move from there on? So let's so someone signs up with
Mhm.
you. We decide that this is a particular goal that we would like to work upon.
Mhm.
You guide us in terms of try this, try that, maybe and then you give us homework. Is that how
Yes.
it works? You give us a homework which we are then supposed to go back and do before the next conversation.
Right. So what I might have you do is, so you would work on, okay, here's how I'm going to set up how I talk to a broader audience. And we would put together the strategic roadmap for that. Then I might say to you, I want you to read this article about telling a story in 2 minutes. Okay. Then I might also say to you, there's a great TED talk on presence by Amy Cuddy, who's a Harvard professor. I want you to take a look at that and see those techniques, right? That you can take to the broader audience outside of podcasting. So that's really, so we would have that meeting. You would go back and we'd have another meeting. We talk about that, refine your strategic roadmap, and then I might say to you, okay, what's the first step for you to take this to the broader audience, right? And you might say, there is a networking event coming up that I want to talk to this X person. Okay. So now we get tactical and I say to you, okay, let's role play for a second. What would you say to me? I'm going to pretend I'm that person that runs the, I don't know, the whatever that is. And you and I would role play. And so that you would refine your message so that you're not taken off guard, and then you'd go off and do that. So it's kind of this iterative process that still gets back to the main goal of I want to take my messages to the broader audience.
So if I have to, look back at the entire process and maybe, try to simplify for my own understanding,
Sure.
it would be, first step is reflection, which is you think about and understand what is it that you want to achieve. The next step comes is around discussion, which is you discuss with your coach as to this is what I want to do. You ask questions, and there is a bit of reflection there as well. And once that is
Mm-hmm.
done, then there is action, which is you say, okay, read this,
Yes.
read that, do this, do that, and then there is
Practice.
practice, and then comes internalization, where I actually go ahead and do that, and having done that, have learned something and internalized a part of what the message is. Then again, the circle continues with reflection
Mm-hmm.
and discussion, action, and the
Mm-hmm.
cycle kind of goes either upward or downward depending upon how the experience turns out to be. Is that fair assessment of what the
That is a
process looks
fair
like?
assessment. There's other kinds of nuances for it, but I think what's really important for your audience is you can do this on your own. The process you just laid out you can do on your own with somebody in your company, or it's the iterative process of growing and succeeding, right? And focusing on the areas of development, or focusing, as you know, I asked you, so what was going right about that, right? So yes, I think that's brilliant. It's a great, right there was a great process for everybody that you articulated. And it's
Interesting.
part of the coaching process.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll go back again to something that you said in your introduction that
Sure.
you are an executive coach at Harvard Business School, if I remember
Yes.
correctly. So,
Mhm.
what do you mean by an executive coach at Harvard Business School? I mean, you either are a teacher or a student there, but what does an
Uh,
executive coach do there?
so in their executive education program, so it's not their MBA program, but it's individuals who senior leaders or leaders going to the next level go work in these executive education programs. And part of you're in a cohort or a living group, you get an executive coach. Not every program does, but that you work on a specific goal with your coach. So
Okay,
that's what I do in the
okay,
executive ed program.
okay. And how did that come about?
It's one of those, I it's just part of the process of networking and becoming part of the program. Really, I guess I would say.
Interesting. Interesting. So, let me ask, something that again sparked my curiosity when you spoke about it. You spoke about a certain routine. So, do you see any routine or habits in the clients that you coach or the executives that you coach that sets them up for success? There are certain there is a
Mm.
lot of focus today on habits, and there is a lot of focus today on when you do certain stuff because of all the research and the books that are coming out and becoming popular. But from a
Yes.
practical perspective, have you seen a certain habit or certain habits or rituals that your clients have or do, uh, which leads them or which sets them up for success?
Okay. So I kind of already talked about a couple of them. One is networking, is really making the time. And it doesn't have to be this long, drawn out 2 hour lunch. It can be a 15-minute conversation. That's a habit that I know that I've seen very successful people do. They're just always meeting interesting people. The second one, as I said, no, I didn't say this one, is I think it's very important to have thinking time because uh, even though, we all have to execute, right? So how do you allow the time to have thinking time from the perspective of, we have one, I forget which side of the brain it is execution, right? And you can't execute and think big ideas at the same time. Very hard for the brain to execute on that point. But how, and I say this to clients, 15 minutes a week, 30 minutes a week, schedule the time to just sit and think. It might be just do nothing and just sit and think. It might be read an article. It might be anything. But how do you allow the brain space to do that? And that's something, does not have to be a lot of time, but a ritual every week.
Interesting. So that brings to a question which I would really like to know is that, how
Mm-hmm.
do you stay on top of things, and how do
Mm-hmm.
you find your learnings from? Because I'm sure that, as with any other profession, being an executive coach means that, you're constantly learning about new stuff. You're constantly learning
Mm-hmm.
about new ways to help your clients. So what does your learning process look like?
Ah, so that's a great point. The most important thing for me is learning. That's what makes me a successful executive coach. So a couple of things. First, it's taking interesting classes outside. Like I said, the poetry class. I talk to lots of different people in terms of, hey, so what is the new interesting leadership? What's quality? There's this assessment. I'm going to get certified in that. I think it's going to be really relevant to the people. It's again running in traffic and networking from that perspective. And frankly, I read a lot. So just all the different ideas out there, so that I have books or ideas to help me ask the right question. That's the most important thing for me, is to really ask the right question of somebody.
So is that a skill that someone can learn? Because I have heard this so many times in so many conversations that the ability to ask the right questions probably
Hmm.
determines the level of success that someone can achieve. So is that a learnable skill? And if yes, how does one learn to ask good questions?
Yes, it's completely learnable skill. And the most important thing I would say, here's the process. Just start asking questions. Doesn't matter what it is, just ask questions. Number two, I think it's think like a journalist. Don't ask a question. So once you start getting nuanced and you want to try some more, ask a question like a journalist. Ask who, what, when, where, why types of questions. When you ask of, so how did you do that? You're going to hear an interesting answer, not, so did this strategy work? And then yes, it worked. And then it kind of ends it, right? The one little nuance I like to say to everybody when you're asking a question is sometimes try to stay away from a why question. If I asked you, so why did you ask that on the podcast? Right? Doesn't that feel slightly defensive a bit? Right? Okay. So you just want to kind of keep it open like a journalist. Think like a journalist or a scientist that you're just looking for interesting nuggets.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I think we are getting close to the time that we have. So I'll get into some of the final questions that we anyway
Sure.
ask all our guests. So I'll start with something which is not very original on my part, but I have heard some very interesting answers given to this question.
Oh
This
boy.
is a question that Srini Rao asks on Unmistakable Creative podcast. The question goes something like this. What was the kind of upbringing that you have? What did your parents do, and what impact did that have on what you are doing today?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I think it comes down to what my father used to say to me. He used to say to me all the time, if you put your mind to it, Anne, you can do it. And that positive reinforcement that's pushed me on the persistence front, right? That I think that was important to me in my upbringing. So just that simple statement as a kid that I can remember 50 years later, that I think that's important. That was important to me in terms of my upbringing.
Interesting. So the next question is, being an executive coach, is there something that
Mhm.
you absolutely hate when your client do?
Oh, my goodness. That's a really good question as well. I don't really hate much because it doesn't really matter what I think is right or wrong. It's what matters to the coach. I mean, yes, obviously there are things, that are right or wrong, embezzlement and all of those sorts of things, but there really is not much. I think the thing that um, is frustrating to me is when people say, I'm going to do this homework, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and they don't do it. And I can see if they do it, they're going to over time succeed success. So that's frustrating to me.
Interesting. Okay. So is there a piece of book, is there a piece of art, a book, a film, a documentary that has had a
Mm.
significant impact on your life that you would want our guest audience to check out?
So I think you bring up a really interesting point in terms of art. When we get back to creativity, just going to an art museum is a fantastic way to open up your mind to possibilities. There are so many books that I love and I would recommend, but one that I just finished that I think is really relevant to your audience is The Power of Moments by
Heath
by
Brothers.
Chip and Dan Heath, the Heath brothers, because I think that really gets to the point of how do you create a special moment when you're selling or when you're working within your company um, that creates this ultimate culture. And I really like the Heath brothers books, all of them. right? Because they have fantastic stories that are actionable to people. So I would recommend for everybody The Power of Moments right now.
So I
It's
think the books by Heath Brothers are the books that I have gifted the most ever.
oh,
So I have whether it is decisive, whether it is switch, whether it is the power of moments, whether it is made to stick. I have
yes.
gifted a lot of these books to my customers, and yeah, I love the work that they do. I remember reading The Power of Moments, and there is one specific passage in that book which talks about an employee onboarding experience. And after
Mm,
I read that passage, I was like, oh my God, how would I feel if I were treated like that? I mean, amazing, way that they present the concept and very actionable. I mean, it's not very
yes.
difficult. You can action it right now, today. If you're the entrepreneur, you can decide to change your onboarding process today, exactly copying what they say in the book.
Right. And that's the John Deere experience, right? And I think that's so here's two interesting things for you, right? That's what you remembered is the story in that book. So when as an entrepreneur or at any time telling the interesting story is what people remember. That outcome. What's the outcome? Not your resume, not the billings of your company, but the interesting story. It is the most impactful.
Interesting. And I've started asking this question to all my guests, which is, is there any belief that you have recently changed? And if yes, what is the belief that you changed, and why did you change your belief?
Hmm. Well, this isn't a belief that I've changed recently, but I think it's something interesting. When I coach people, it's so interesting to me when I'm surprised and about the answer that somebody gives me. So asking the question is always so important because we might get a fantastic surprise, right? And that surprise is also a way that I learn myself. So I think that's something, it's not really a change in belief, but it's a belief that I have.
And why is that so? I mean, you say that when you get surprised, you
Mm-hmm.
like it. So what about that
Oh,
surprise that let's unpack that a little bit.
so when I ask a certain stream of questions, and and I have an outline in my head, almost like a pyramid, an upside down pyramid of how I ask people questions. And I kind of think and I think about it in a decision tree, in terms of it's just a skill that I've learned over the years when I coach. And when I think the decision tree is going to go this way and it actually turns and moves into another branch, I find that very interesting to me, right? Because then it's a way that we're all thinking differently and we all help each other as partners and teams. So that's really kind of how I answer that. And I like that surprise. It's just it's just interesting to hear a different point of view is the way I like to look at it.
So does that also lead to a different kind of work you do with the client, or is that something that you make a note of and come back to it later and again get back to your regular stream of questions that you have in your mind?
It depends. I'm sorry to say that it just depends on the specific situation and the client. I might hold that in my head, or we might really think about that strategy for them and what we're thinking about in terms of the goal.
So it depends is one of the best answers that I have come across, because of the fact that a lot of times in our times, the world that we live in, everyone seems to know the right answer.
Oh,
Everyone seems to know that what I am saying is the right answer, or I am
mm-hmm.
right and you are wrong. And it sounds so nice when someone says it depends, and it could be this way or that way depending upon the situation or depending upon the conditions. And
Mm-hmm.
that's, I think we need a lot more it depends answers now than
Yeah.
ever in the history.
I agree with you. And I coach people on being the smartest guy in the room or gal in the room because it creates a lack of empowerment for people, right? That then my team just knows, well, John knows, so I'm not going to give my different point of view, right? So asking the question, just asking, so what do you think? Takes away that smartest guy in the room piece as well. I completely agree with you on that front. Absolutely.
Okay. So the last question that we end all our conversations with is the show is called Pushing Beyond the Obvious. So
Mm-hmm.
what is so obvious to you that people miss all the time?
Asking for feedback. And you have to have it in a safe place. Sometimes asking people that work for you feedback is difficult. But the obvious thing is, how do you get data about yourself and feedback so that you can grow and you can learn more? I think that's sort of the obvious. That is one obvious piece that we don't ask for feedback enough.
Interesting. So do you have or do you know of a smart, funny, or a fast way that one of your clients have set up asking for feedback from their employees or from their clients, employees, partners, whoever?
So I'm going to be I'm really going to put a cautionary piece on this, that there are some instances when you should not be asking for feedback from your team. You have to be willing to hear some things, right? Or maybe it's just not the right time in your company to be asking that. I really need to qualify that, right? Up front. But, you could say, here's something very simple. So tell me what you think worked well in our last meeting. And tell me what do you think we could have done better, right? Or what could I have done better in the last meeting? But you have to be really cautious about asking those sorts of things, just face to face. So
Super. So please tell us where people can find more about you and the work that you do.
absolutely. So if you go to my website, annesugar.com, it's ANNE, sugar, just like sugar.com, or you can email me at annesugar.com as well if you have a question. So those are ways to reach me.
Super. So thanks a lot for taking time and talking to us today and sharing your insights with us.
Oh, I really enjoyed speaking to you. It was great. Fantastic.
Super.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Pushing Beyond the Obvious. If you like the show and would like to support, please head over to iTunes or wherever you are listening to this show and rate us and write a review. Till next time, have fun.